One day, something barely noticeable happens inside. Not an explosion, not pain, not drama. You stop and suddenly feel something that held your inner structure together no longer supports you. It's like a barely audible crunch, as if the old structure built from other people's expectations begins to crack under its own weight. You try to live as before, smile at the same people, take the same steps, but suddenly you realize something no longer gives in. And you too. You can no longer tolerate what you've tolerated for years. You can't play the role that once saved you but now suffocates you. You can't force yourself to be what you were once taught to be for love, for peace, for the sake of not disappointing anyone. And this inner crack seems frightening. But what if it's not destruction? What if this is the beginning of truth, the first breath after a long sleep, the first step back to where you once left yourself? Carl Jung said, "What we resist does not disappear, it returns as fate." Maybe this pain isn't an enemy, but a letter your soul has been sending you for years, and which you've finally decided to open. Sometimes it seems easier to go back to being who they once wanted you to be. Convenient, quiet, predictable. The one who doesn't ask too much, doesn't demand, doesn't get angry, doesn't interfere. But this is only possible as long as you still have the strength to wear a mask. And then comes a moment when even simple things become unbearable, as if the skin, pressed against you for years by other people's expectations, has finally stopped enduring it. You begin to notice. Your desires no longer fit into a framework, your soul no longer agrees to remain silent, your pain no longer fits under the rug. And this isn't weakness, it's maturity, because only an adult can admit, "I'm in pain, I'm having a hard time, I need something different." We're used to thinking that strength is patience, but sometimes strength is admitting to yourself that you've stopped living your life. Jung said that the shadow isn't what makes us bad, it's what makes us whole. And when the crack inside widens, when it begins to reveal what you've been hiding for years, it can be frightening. It feels like you're losing control, stability, meaning. But in reality, you're only losing one thing, an illusion. And for the first time in years, you have a chance to connect with something real. Your voice, your desires, your truth. The truth isn't always comfortable. It's rarely silent. Sometimes it sounds like thunder and destroys all the structures you've built to be liked, to survive, to be needed. But only the truth can bring you home. Home isn't a place, it's a state in which you no longer hide from yourself. But to return there, you must pass through a desert, a period when everything old is crumbling and the new has not yet been created. It's that space between no longer and not yet. And it can seem unbearable, because there you are left alone with yourself, without roles, without masks, without the usual explanations. At first, in this silence, only pain is heard. The same pain you've carried for years, but hidden under responsibilities, successes, others' expectations, the endless musts. It rises to the surface and asks, "When will you finally look at me?" Jung wrote that the path of individuation is not about adorning yourself with new qualities, but about encountering what you've been running from. And so you find yourself facing your own shadows: anxiety, anger, guilt, shame, fatigue, the desire to leave, the desire to start all over again. What you once considered weakness turns out to be a door. What you considered chaos turns out to be part of your wholeness. And suddenly you realize you're not broken, you're overloaded. You're tired of living the wrong truth for years. And that crack you thought was the end is actually an entrance. An entrance into your own depth, into the space where your true strength resides, where you no longer ask permission to be yourself. Sometimes, to be born again, you must first fall apart. And that's not destruction. It's the beginning of real life. When you begin to reassemble yourself, you understand. You can no longer build your life on the old foundations. You can't return to relationships where you were seen only through the prism of convenience. You can't live in patterns where your desires are too much, your feelings are too loud, your needs are later. You are no longer the same person who remained silent so as not to hurt others, who endured to preserve the world, who forgot themselves in order to be loved. Now you begin to hear an inner voice, the very one you've been suppressing for years. I am alive, I need, I care, I have a right. And this isn't selfishness, it's a return to your nature. Jung said that a healthy form of egoism is the foundation of personality. Without it, a child cannot become an adult, because their self remains dissolved in the expectations of others. And so you stand on the threshold of a new stage and for the first time ask yourself, what do I want? Sometimes the answer is silence, sometimes fear, sometimes confusion, but this is no longer the silence that was once emptiness. This is the silence of an unfamiliar space, the silence of a new beginning. Over time, you begin to discern subtle impulses, the desire to rest, the desire to choose, the desire to say no, the desire to stop saving everyone around you, the desire to stop being a shadow in your own life. And gradually you notice, you're no longer trying to earn love, you're learning to accept it. You're no longer running from conflict, you know how to speak the truth. You're no longer afraid of being inconvenient because only a living person can be inconvenient. You begin to organize yourself not according to the principle of what's right, but according to the principle of what resonates. And suddenly, small but real miracles happen. Your shoulders drop, your breathing deepens, your voice grows stronger. For the first time in a long time, you feel not fear, not tension, but your own presence. Here it is, your return, not home, but to yourself. But the path to yourself isn't a straight line. Sometimes it seems like you've taken a step forward, and then suddenly you fall back into old fears, old reactions, old roles. You catch yourself again trying to please, keeping silent, behaving too correctly, too carefully, as if you were still living in that childhood room where making mistakes was dangerous. And in such moments, it's easy to think that you haven't understood anything, haven't changed, failed to cope. But the truth is different. Every return to old patterns is not a failure, but an invitation to look deeper. What exactly hurts? What exactly still requires your attention? What part of you is still afraid to live openly? Jung said that recurring difficulties are not punishment but messages from the unconscious. If a wound resurfaces, it means it needs care, not control. And you gradually begin to learn this rare art to be kind to yourself in moments of weakness. You tell yourself, yes, I was scared again. Yes, I withdrew again, but I'm here, I'm near, I won't abandon myself. And this is miraculously healing. Because for the first time in your life, next to your pain, there is no criticism, no shame, no demand to be strong, but presence. You begin to understand, integrity isn't always being confident and calm. Integrity is when you allow everything within yourself, fear, doubt, the desire to hide, and the courage to move forward. In other words, when you stop dividing yourself into right and wrong and begin to see that all of this is you. And that's okay. At this moment, something relaxes so deeply, as if you've been keeping a door closed from the inside for years, and now you simply allow it to open. You see your fragility and you don't turn away. You see your anger and you're not afraid. You see your desires and you don't judge. This is how true maturity is born in a person, not through perfection but through honesty. And the more you allow yourself to be alive, the quieter the inner chaos becomes, and the more clearly you hear something important, unnoticeable but very familiar, your true voice. When your inner voice becomes a little clearer, you suddenly notice something you hadn't seen before. The world no longer seems hostile. It seems three-dimensional, multi-layered. You begin to discern subtle shades of feeling, noticing where other people's emotions end and yours begin. It's surprising. All your life, you thought you had to recognize the moods of others in order to survive, to avoid disappointing them, to adapt in time. You're used to navigating the world as if through a minefield, carefully, gently, scanning every change in someone else's face. But now something changes. For the first time, you ask yourself, what am I feeling? Sometimes there's no answer. Sometimes there's a fog inside. But this question itself is already a step. Jung wrote that a person becomes themselves when they cease to be a function of others' expectations and begin to listen to their own unconscious. And so you stand at a crossroads between the old reflex to please and the new right to be alive. You notice that you no longer want to be everyone's comfort. You don't want to be quieter than you are. You don't want to constantly explain your worth. You suddenly realize you don't have to be needed to be worthy. This understanding doesn't come immediately. First, as a faint whisper, then as a quiet confidence, then as a foundation, that very inner core that you've always lacked. And what's interesting, as soon as you stop suppressing your needs, your body begins to relax, as if it had been waiting for years for permission to live. You begin to notice the little things that you previously suppressed. The desire to rest, the desire to be alone, the desire to say no, the desire not to save anyone today. When you allow yourself this, the world doesn't collapse. On the contrary, everything falls into place. Because by accepting your truth, you stop living in a state of internal conflict. And for the first time in many years, you feel something akin to silence, to clarity, to presence. This is not the end. This is the beginning of a new chapter where you don't lose yourself in others and don't dissolve in their fears. This is a chapter where you learn to be an adult in the deepest sense, to be your own support. When a person begins to develop inner support, they gradually stop living in a state of constant threat. Not because the world becomes safer, but because they cease to be a child who needs to read the moods of everyone around them in order to survive. You begin to sense the difference between external circumstances and your inner state, between the real situation and an anxious fantasy, between what is actually happening and what you've come to expect. It's like waking up from a long nightmare. At first you're still afraid, but gradually you notice you're no longer there, you're no longer small, you're no longer helpless. Jung said, "We don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are." And when inner fear ceases to control you, the world stops seeming like a continuous trap. You finally feel like you can choose rather than react. Instead of avoiding life, you begin to enter it step by step, timidly at first, warily, but still enter. You notice you can walk down the street and not cringe at every person you see. You can look at people in uniform and feel tension but not dread. You can return home not with the feeling of having miraculously escaped something, but simply with the fatigue of an ordinary day. It seems like a small thing, but in reality, it's a huge step. It means an adult is forming within you, standing next to you, holding your shoulder and saying, "I'm here, I can handle it, we'll get through this together." You no longer live on the brink of panic. You live in reality, and this reality opens up something you haven't seen in a long time, a space of choice. You can change your route not out of fear but out of reasonable caution. You can pay closer attention, not because the world is dangerous but because you're mindful. You can plan your steps in advance, not as a victim but as someone with a strategy. You begin to feel the difference between running and caring for yourself. And it is here that which is the foundation of mental maturity returns to you, self-trust. Not absolute, not heroic, but quiet, stable, warm, like an inner home, which you build from small daily steps. As silence appears in your life, something that was hidden too deeply begins to return your strength. Not the strength that shouts, presses, and proves itself, but a different kind, calm, mature, and inner. The kind that doesn't need approval, isn't afraid to be imperfect, and doesn't try to control everything around you. You notice that you try to please others less and less, not out of harshness, but because you stop living with the feeling that love must be earned. You no longer adapt automatically, you choose. You don't bend but listen to whether you're comfortable. You don't dissolve in other people's emotions but distinguish between what's theirs and what's yours. And this doesn't distance you from people. On the contrary, for the first time in your life, you become truly accessible. Because now I can communicate with you without playing around, without masks, without fear, without trying to be correct. Jung said that personality integration is not a transformation into light, but the ability to hold both light and shadow without disintegrating. You become such a person, alive, real, imperfect, and precisely because of this whole. With each passing day, you feel your boundaries more clearly. You no longer intrude too deeply into other people's lives. You don't take on other people's feelings. You don't save others at the cost of yourself. And the most amazing thing is that you stop being afraid of mistakes. You understand that a mistake is not a death sentence, not a loss of love, not a catastrophe, but simply a step, an ordinary human step. This is how freedom returns, not loudly, not suddenly, but as a light sensation of open space within. You're walking down the street and suddenly you catch yourself thinking, "I'm just walking, I'm here, I'm allowed to be." And this feeling is not euphoria, not inspiration, but a quiet, deep allowance. You're no longer running away from life. You're no longer hiding from the world. You're no longer hiding from yourself. You're gradually becoming a person who can walk any road, not because it's safe, but because you have support within. When your inner support grows stronger, you begin to see the world differently, as a space of choice, not threats. Before, every day seemed like a test, every route a trap, every new person a potential danger. Now everything is different. Dangers may exist, but they no longer fill your entire inner world. Fear doesn't disappear completely, but it no longer commands. It takes its place as a signal, not as a master. For the first time, you feel that you can live not from a state of survival, but from a state of presence. And with this comes another important sensation: curiosity. You begin to notice. You want to explore the world, not hide. You want to try, not avoid. You want to take steps, even if they are imperfect. Jung wrote that individuation is the journey from fear of one's own shadow to a willingness to engage in dialogue with it. And so you begin to notice in yourself what was previously considered a weakness: your sensitivity, your ability to feel deeply, your intuition, your attentiveness. It turns out these aren't flaws, they're resources. They were simply distorted by fear. Now they become tools that help you navigate life. You begin to speak more honestly. You begin to listen more deeply. You begin to notice things that others miss. You stop living by reactions. You begin to live by decisions. And the most amazing thing is that meaning returns. The same meaning that was missing for years when you lived in constant tension, when every action was colored by fear, when the future seemed empty and dangerous. Now meaning grows from within, from your desires, from your values, from your steps. It doesn't come as an epiphany. It comes as an understanding. I want to live. I want to be. I want to move on. This isn't pathos. It's a quiet but powerful inner shift, as if a faint, yet very warm light were igniting in the soul. A light that doesn't need to be hidden, and which can no longer be extinguished. When you penetrate all the inner layers, fear, resistance, pain, shadow, when you stop hiding your vulnerability and are no longer afraid of your own strength, something amazing happens. You begin to feel whole, not perfect, not unshakable, but complete. Integrity doesn't mean the absence of weaknesses. It means that weaknesses no longer control you, that the shadow no longer dictates your scenarios, that old pain no longer defines your path. You begin to understand that everything that happened to you before was no accident. Every crack, every fall, every loss, these are steps that led you within to where you've always been, but where you were afraid to look. And now, when you stand before your true self, without masks, without other people's voices, without inner prisons, you see, you survived, you endured, you grew. Jung wrote that a person achieves completeness when he connects consciousness with the unconscious and begins to live not out of fear, but from his deepest nature. This is what happens to you. You begin to live not to not disappoint someone, but to not betray yourself. Not to earn love, but because you already are, and that is enough. Not to avoid pain, but to go where the truth is. You walk down the street and suddenly notice there is more space in your body. There is less noise in your head. There is more stable softness in your heart. You are still human. You can be afraid, you can doubt, you can make mistakes. But now this does not destroy you. It is simply part of the journey. You no longer live as if trapped. You no longer shrink with every step. You no longer feel that the world is stronger than you. Now you have something that wasn't there before, an inner home. Quiet, solid, real. A home where your feelings have a place. A home where your shadow is not an enemy, but part of the whole. A home where you yourself are not a guest, but a master. And when you finally understand this, a feeling comes not of delight, not of euphoria, but of deep, mature peace. You are returned to yourself, and from this place you can go anywhere. Share your insights in the comments. Support the channel by liking and subscribing to see new videos. Thanks for watching.